There comes a moment in every narcissist's life when they must face the fact that they are not as invincible as they believe. We live in a world where arrogance can sometimes take center stage, where the proud seem to walk through life with their heads held high as if they're untouchable. But let me tell you something. God has a way of bringing down the proud, of humbling the mighty, and he's never too late to teach us that our strength is not in ourselves, but in him. You see, the narcissist may think they are on top of the world, untouchable and beyond reproach. But God has a way of working in the lives of the proud that causes them to stop and reconsider their position. There's a divine principle that cannot be broken. God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. Now, the proud person thinks they have everything under control. They don't need anyone. They don't need God. They've built their empire, their reputation, and their identity on their own achievements and self-importance. They walk through life with an inflated sense of worth, as if everything revolves around them. But God, who sees all things, is not fooled by the mask they wear. He sees the emptiness behind the image they project. He sees the loneliness behind the bravado, the insecurity that drives their arrogance. And here's the thing, God doesn't need to strike them down with lightning or call down fire from heaven to get their attention. No, God doesn't have to do any of that. All God has to do is let them encounter situations that reveal just how powerless they really are. He can allow circumstances to arise that expose their vulnerabilities. He can let their carefully constructed walls of pride and self-sufficiency crumble under the weight of their own human limitation. What they thought was unshakable, whether it's their reputation, their wealth, or their social status, can begin to slip through their fingers. And when that happens, they are left face to face with the reality that they are not in control after all. God has a way of humbling the proud, but this humbling is not punishment, it's an invitation. It's God's way of calling them to a place where they can truly see themselves. It's an invitation to surrender. You see, God doesn't want to break us down for the sake of breaking us down. He wants to break us open so that he can fill us with something better. He wants to tear away the arrogance so that we can discover the freedom that comes from humility. In the midst of their humbling, God is showing them that true strength isn't about self-sufficiency, it's about dependence on him. The narcissist may fight this process. They may resist the humbling. They may try to maintain their pride, but God's purpose is greater than their resistance. He knows how to get through to us in ways that we don't expect. And when he does, we are left with a choice. Either we will stay in our pride and be brought even lower, or we will allow God to lift us up by embracing humility. God doesn't just tear down the proud to leave them broken. He tears down the proud to rebuild them in his image. Stronger, wiser, and with a heart that's more open to his love and grace. So even though the narcissist may feel invincible for a season, God will bring humility, and when he does, it's not to destroy them, but to bring them into a place where they can be transformed by his power. You see, the narcissist may be all about the outside world, all about what others think, how they are perceived, and how they can manipulate every situation to fit their narrative. But God doesn't look at the outer appearances. He sees the heart, and I need you to hear me clearly. God isn't fooled by the mask we wear, by the polished exterior, or the perfect facade we put up for the world to see. Oh no, God sees beyond the surface. He sees the motives that drive our actions, the intentions that are buried deep within, the real us that no one else can truly know. And when it comes to the narcissist, God exposes the heart in ways that no one else can. You see, a narcissist may think they can fool the world. They may think that they've perfected the art of deception, telling the story they want others to hear, painting a picture of themselves that is all glitter and gold. But God isn't just concerned with the picture we paint for others. He's concerned with the truth of who we are when no one else is watching. And when God starts to expose the heart, that's when the real work begins. God's way of exposing the heart isn't meant to tear us down. It's meant to show us who we really are and give us the opportunity to change. The narcissist may believe they are superior. They may walk around with their chest puffed up, thinking they are better than everyone else. But when God starts to reveal what's really going on inside, the truth begins to surface. The pride, the insecurity, the fear, the need for validation, all those things the narcissist tries to hide from the world, God begins to pull back the curtain and expose them. And when that happens, the narcissist is forced to confront themselves in a way they never have before. I know it's not easy to face the truth. I know it's not easy to look into the mirror and see what's really there. But here's the thing. God doesn't expose the heart to embarrass us. He exposes it to heal us. He shines a light into the darkest corners of our lives, so that they may resist the idea that there's anything wrong with their behavior or attitude. But God's exposure is a chance to get right with Him, to begin the process of transformation. And this isn't just about the narcissist, it's about all of us. We all have hearts that are in need of God's work. We all have motives that may not align with His will. But God, in His love, is willing to shine a light on those areas so that we can be free from the bondage of deceit and pride. When God exposes the heart, it's not the end. It's the beginning of something new, something powerful. The narcissist may feel exposed, they may feel vulnerable, and they may fight against it. But the truth is, God isn't exposing them to shame them. He's exposing them to free them. Because once we see the truth of who we are, we can be transformed. And that's what God desires, to take the broken, the proud, and the lost and make them whole again. When God exposes the heart, it's His invitation to experience true freedom, true healing, and true change. The question is, will we accept that invitation, or will we continue to hide behind our walls of pride and arrogance? God's exposure is always a step toward His grace, and it's the beginning of our journey to becoming who He created us to be. Let me tell you something, no matter how far we've gone, no matter how lost we might feel in our pride and our arrogance, God always extends an invitation of grace. You see, the narcissist may think that they have it all figured out, that they're in control, that they don't need anyone, least of all God. They may think that they can make it through life on their own, relying on their own strength, their own charm, their own ability to manipulate situations to their advantage. But I want to remind you today that God in his mercy is always extending grace. He is always offering forgiveness. Even when we are at our worst, when we've built up walls of pride and self-sufficiency, God is still reaching out with his hand of mercy, saying, come to me. And here's the beauty of God's grace. It's not based on our performance. It's not based on how good we are, how worthy we feel. No. God's grace isn't something we earn. It's a gift. And that grace is available to everyone, even to those who have lived in arrogance and pride. And you see, the narcissists may think they are beyond the reach of God's love. They may think that because of their behavior, because of their selfishness, they have somehow placed themselves outside the bounds of God's forgiveness. But I want to tell you today that there is no place where God's grace cannot reach. There is no heart so hardened, no pride so deep that God's mercy cannot break through. Even when the narcissist resists, even when they push away the idea of humility, God still offers grace. Even when they choose to live in selfishness, even when they reject the idea of serving others or acknowledging their need for God, God continues to extend that grace. It doesn't matter how far they've fallen or how many mistakes they've made, God is always ready to forgive, always ready to redeem, always ready to restore. Now, I know the narcissists may not always accept God's grace right away. They may continue in their self-sufficiency for a time. They may reject the idea that they need God's help, but God in his love will continue to pursue them. He will never give up on them, even when they give up on themselves. There is no wall too high, no pride too strong that can separate us from the love of God. His grace is relentless. And it's not just about forgiveness, it's about transformation. When God extends his grace to the narcissist, he doesn't just forgive their sins, he begins a work of transformation. He starts to change their heart, to soften their spirit, to replace their pride with humility and their selfishness with love. The grace of God is powerful enough to break down even the strongest wounds. It's powerful enough to heal the deepest wound. And when the narcissist finally allows themselves to receive that grace, they experience a change that can only come from God. The key is receiving it. God's grace is available, but it's up to us whether or not we accept it. We can keep building our walls of pride, keep resisting God's love, or we can humble ourselves and receive the grace that is freely given. It's not too late. God is still offering grace, still reaching out, still calling us to come home. And no matter how far we've strayed, no matter how much we've rejected his grace in the past, God's arms are wide open, ready to welcome us back. His grace is always available, always ready to heal, always ready to restore. All we have to do is accept it. God is always at work, even when we don't see it, even when we resist it, even when we're caught up in our pride and self-importance. But let me tell you something today. God doesn't leave us stuck in our mess. He doesn't leave us in the same place we've always been. No, God is a God of transformation. He's a God who doesn't just leave us in our brokenness. He offers us the chance to change, to grow, to become something better. And that opportunity for transformation is available to even the most hardened hearts. Even to those who have built their entire identity on arrogance and selfishness. You see, when God provides opportunities for transformation, it's not always in the way we expect. We may think that transformation means an easy road, a straight path, with everything falling into place just as we desire, but God's ways are higher than ours. The opportunities He gives us to change often come through challenges, through struggles, through moments that shake us to our core. And let me tell you, the narcissist may not always be open to this transformation at first. They may resist it. They may want to hold on to their pride, to their sense of superiority, to the idea that they don't need to change. But God in His mercy keeps presenting opportunities for growth, keeps bringing situations into their life that force them to reckon with who they really are. It may be through a crisis, a failure, a moment of weakness that the narcissist is finally forced to face the truth. For someone who has always relied on their own strength, their own ability to control everything, that moment of vulnerability can be a turning point. It's in those moments when everything they thought was secure begins to unravel that they are faced with the truth that they cannot do it all alone. And in that space, God provides the opportunity for change. But here's the thing, change doesn't happen by accident. Transformation doesn't happen without effort. God can present all the opportunities in the world, but it's up to us whether we embrace them. It's up to the narcissist to choose whether they will humble themselves, whether they will recognize their need for God, whether they will allow themselves to be transformed. God doesn't force His will upon anyone. He doesn't force us to change, but He gives us every opportunity to do so. He provides the tools, the grace, and the strength we need to grow, but we have to choose to walk in that transformation. And here's where the real beauty comes in. God doesn't just transform us for the sake of transformation. He transforms us so that we can become who He created us to be. The narcissist may have lived a life full of selfish ambition, but God's transformation takes that selfishness and turns it into something beautiful. He takes the heart that was once driven by pride and turns it into a heart that is driven by love. He takes the person who thought only of themselves and makes them someone who can think of others, someone who can serve, someone who can lead with humility and compassion. Transformation is a process, and it's not always easy, but the opportunity is there, always. God is always offering the chance to change, to grow, to become more like Him. It's a gift, one that doesn't depend on our past or our mistakes. It's a gift of grace, a gift of love, a gift of restoration. And even the hardest heart, even the most prideful person, can experience that transformation if they're willing to accept the opportunity when it comes. So I want to encourage you today, don't run from God's opportunities for transformation, even if they come through struggles or challenges. Trust that God is working behind the scenes. He is using every moment to mold you into the person you were always meant to be. Embrace the opportunity to change, to grow, and to become who God has called you to be. Because when God provides an opportunity for transformation, it's never too late to start walking in it. The truth of the matter is this: pride is a dangerous thing. It builds walls between us and others, and it builds walls between us and God. But there's something incredible about the way God works. You see, while the narcissist may walk through life with a sense of superiority, believing they are above others and even above God, there's a divine principle at work in the kingdom that cannot be ignored. God resists the arrogant, but gives grace to the humble. The one who lifts themselves up in pride will eventually be brought low, but the one who humbles himself will experience the full measure of God's grace and blessing. The narcissist, in their arrogance, believes that they are the center of the universe. They walk around with an inflated sense of self, acting as if the world owes them something. They demand respect, they demand attention, they demand admiration, and they do whatever it takes to maintain their image. They manipulate, they control, and they use others to prop up their fragile ego. But the reality is, God's kingdom works in the opposite direction. God doesn't elevate the arrogant, he resists them. He doesn't reward the one who insists on their own greatness. Instead, he humbles them. God's resistance doesn't come in the form of harsh punishment, but in the form of natural consequences. When the narcissist refuses to humble themselves, they often find that the very things they built, whether it's their reputation, their relationships, or their sense of security, begin to crumble. People see through the facade. The power they once wielded slips from their grasp. The relationships they once controlled begin to break down. Why? Because God resists the proud. He allows the consequences of pride to do the work of humbling the heart. But here's where the beautiful part comes in. God doesn't just leave the proud to fall and remain in their brokenness. No, God's heart is to lift up the humble. When the narcissist or anyone finally lets go of their pride and chooses to humble themselves before God, that's when they experience the fullness of his grace. God does not withhold his grace from the humble. He pours it out abundantly on those who recognize their need for him. Humility is not about self-deprecation or thinking less of oneself. No, humility is about seeing ourselves rightly, understanding that everything we have, everything we are, is a gift from God. It's recognizing that we are not self-sufficient, that we cannot do this thing called life on our own. And when we come to that realization, when the narcissist finally acknowledges their need for God and lets go of their arrogance, that's when the floodgates of grace open wide. It's like this. God resists the proud because he knows the proudful person is stuck in their own ways, stuck in a mindset that doesn't allow for growth or change. The proud person is so focused on maintaining their position, their status, and their sense of superiority that they cannot receive the blessings and transformation God wants to offer. But when the heart is humble, when we say, God, I can't do this without you, that's when God can begin to pour in his grace. That's when God can lift us up. He can take the broken, the lost, the prideful, and make something beautiful out of their life. So let me say this to you today. If you're walking through life with a heart of pride, God is calling you to humility. He's calling you to let go of the arrogance, to lay down your self-sufficiency, and to recognize that he is the source of everything you need. When you humble yourself before God, he will lift you up in ways you never imagined. He will take you higher than you can ever go on your own. Humility doesn't mean weakness, it means strength in God's power. And when you humble yourself, you position yourself to receive the full measure of his grace, mercy, and blessing. There is something about the way God works that we don't always understand, something that's so deep and so powerful that it goes beyond human comprehension. You see, God doesn't just leave us to walk in the consequences of our actions without purpose. No, he uses those very consequences to shape us, to mold us, to bring us back to a place where we can see his grace at work. For the narcissist, someone who has lived in the illusion of control, who has built their life on self-reliance and pride, the consequences can be a wake-up call. They can be a divine tool that God uses to bring the truth to light, to open their eyes to the destructive power of their behavior. Often it's through the consequences that the narcissist begins to see the damage they've done, not just to others, but to themselves. When their manipulations no longer work, when their charm starts to fade, when the people around them begin to see through the mask they've been wearing, that's when the reality sets in. The very thing they've built their life upon, control, pride, self-sufficiency, begins to slip away. And it's in those moments when everything seems to unravel that God is working. He's not punishing them for punishment's sake. He's allowing the consequences of their actions to do a work of restoration. God allows these consequences because He loves us enough to bring us back to Him. Now, I know the narcissist doesn't see it that way. In their pride, they may look at these consequences as a personal attack, as if the world is out to get them. They may blame others or the situation for their downfall, but the truth is, God is using those very circumstances to open their eyes to who they really are. They've spent their whole lives building an identity based on falsehoods. But the consequences force them to look at the truth. And it's in that truth, uncomfortable as it may be, that they begin to understand how much they need God. When the consequences become too heavy to bear, they are forced to reckon with their pride, to see the destruction they've caused, and to face the fact that they cannot fix it on their own. But let me tell you something powerful. Even when we face the consequences of our actions, God does not abandon us. God does not leave us in the mess we've created. In fact, He uses those consequences to draw us closer to Him. It's in our brokenness, our weakness, that God's strength shines brightest. The narcissist may try to run from the pain, try to mask it with even more pride or manipulation, but God is right there, waiting for them to turn to Him. He is right there, waiting for them to admit that they can't do it alone. And when they finally do, when they finally admit their need for Him, that's when the healing begins. You see, the consequences aren't the end of the story. They're the beginning of something new. They're the starting point for transformation. God doesn't allow the narcissist to fall to destroy them. He allows them to fall so that they can rise up again in His strength. When the narcissist faces the truth, when they face the consequences, they are presented with a choice. They can stay in their pride, in their self-deception, or they can humble themselves and receive the grace that is always available. So, when you see someone walking through the consequences of their actions, don't be so quick to judge. Recognize that God may be at work in ways you can't see. He is using those very circumstances to bring them to a place of repentance, to a place of healing, and to a place where they can experience His love in a way they never have before. The consequences of our actions may hurt, they may be difficult to bear, but they are not the final word. God is working through them to bring about change, to restore, and to redeem. And for the narcissist, as for all of us, that redemption is always within reach.